Let AJ Doman Chevrolet be your one stop for all your business needs in 2025. Whether it's a service body, a flatbed, or a chassis for a custom upfit, we got you covered. And we know time's important, so we have a large selection of work-ready trucks on hand. AJ Doman Chevrolet, servicing the area for over 35 years at the foot of the Morgan City Bridge in Berwick. AJ Doman Chevrolet, your business elite dealer.
All right, we are back. It is time for Good Vibes again. I'm Martin Foss with Debbie Cox DeNova. She is right here. How you doing, Debbie?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I love the topic today, avoiding psychological games.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. You got a lot written down on that?
It's a great big topic. We're not going to get through all of it today. But it bears repeating that we have touched on this topic before when we talked about the drama triangle. So it comes back into the conversation for those of you who have not seen the show, or if you need a refresher on the drama triangle. This is a psychological model of conflict that was originally conceptualized by Stephen Karpman, psychiatrist, and it basically describes that when we are in an unconscious pattern of communication that is dramatic, we will take one of three roles and usually switch between those roles as we communicate. So there is the hero, which he calls the rescuer. There is the villain, which he calls the persecutor. And then there's the villain. So hero is saving, but usually with no boundaries and not actually saving long term. So giving a temporary solution that has that person continue to rely on them. So giving a fish sandwich when you know how to teach the person how to fish, essentially, right? A lot of enablers with people who are addicts, like I'll get you your thing that you're addicted to right now so you can feel better, but long term, it's not really working out. The villain, you can just picture the persecutor with their finger pointed, blame, shame, criticize, judging. There's kind of like an egoic superiority to that position. And then of course the victim, like, it's not my fault, it's everybody else. I'm at the mercy of you guys, of the environment, politics.
Yeah, they did
economy.
it to me when I was a kid.
Yeah, just imagine somebody with a rope tied around them, okay? Now, really important to understand, and as a reminder, that this is trauma-driven. So every single human being, no matter what, has psychological needs that need to be met. Those who participate in the drama triangle and mind games in general, in order to get their needs and desires met, simply learned at an early age that it was unsafe to do it in a secure way, directly, and to ask for what they need or desire. Either they were met with punishment or negative feedback. They were told to go to their room and process that on their own. So they learned that in order for them to actually feel better when their nervous system is regulated, they have to come about it in a sideways way. So we could call that emotional manipulation, and you'll see a lot of that in here. The purpose of today's conversation, of course, is so that you can not only recognize when someone else is playing mind games and inviting you in, but also to be super honest with yourself about the mind games that you play, the way that you participate. And if you find yourself in drama over and over again, like a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, same relationship over and over and over again. Are all men the same? Are all women the same, right? If you find yourself in the same circumstances over and over again, you are participating on some level. And it's really powerful to understand how you're getting hooked into these games and how you can stop playing them yourself. And so today is all about learning the formula, because there is a 6-sequence formula, and being able to identify where you fit into the game so that before you actually get into that place, it's kind of intoxicating. When you're in mind games with someone, it's sort of it's an irritation, but there's also a little bit of a deliciousness about this. And when I talk to my clients, it's so funny. I'm like, let's just be honest. Like, what do you really want out of this? It's not to really break up. What is it that you really want, right? So there's these little manipulations that we do, power plays to get what we need. So being able to recognize, okay, honestly, this is how I typically play. And then honestly, this is how that other person typically plays. And this is the payoff that I'm getting from it.
So
really
keeping
important.
people on edge to get what you want.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes it's about keeping on. It depends on the role that you're playing in here. Now, there was a psychiatrist in 1964 named Eric Berne who wrote a book called Games People Play. And he was the sort of godfather of transactional analysis. And transactional analysis is all about learning the transactions. And transactions are just those communications that we have with each other where we're getting our needs and desires met, sometimes unconsciously, with psychological sort of manipulations behind the scenes. And being able to identify that so that you can come to the table with a little bit more of a responsible mode. He actually identified that there are 3 ego states that we fall into when we're in communications. And 2 of them are based on our history in the original family system. So the first one is the parent. So the parent role can be split off into 2 different roles. There is the critical parent, right? Sort of the condemning the critical parent. And then there's the nurturing parent. Okay. Then there's the child. Okay. And the child can be split off into 2. The adaptive child who's learned how to, cope in the circumstances that are there, and the free child who kind of tends to do what they want to do and oftentimes get in trouble. The third one is the only one that is not based on your own family system from the past, and that's the adult. So you have the parent, the child, and the adult. And while there is nothing inherently good, bad, right, or wrong about any one of these roles, it is Eric Berne's encouragement that you try to show up as the adult in these situations, because now you are operating from a conscious place that is not based on trauma, but rather on getting the results, the needs and the desires that you have met in a more direct way, setting boundaries and things like that. So remembering those 3 states, and also remembering that in the drama triangle, you fall into the hero, the villain, and the victim, or the rescuer, the persecutor, and the victim.
This becomes pretty complicated, doesn't it?
It does, but once we start talking about the different roles, I want you to actually start at home. Think of the one person, there's typically one person, maybe there's more than one, who you have recurring conflict with. It's easier when you're able to actually start to assign these things, like these roles, these rules, all of these things to an actual situation, because then you can actually use this technology to pull yourself out of these mind games and actually come into a more peaceful state that is more healthier for you and for the other person.
So the word can come into play quite a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, calm yourself down.
Exactly.
When you're in this conflict.
Yes.
All right, we'll be right back with part 2. Don't go away.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
All right, we're back with Debbie Cox DeNova. We're talking about avoiding psychological games. And while you've been talking and during the break, I want to play the game or do the thing because I've identified what my number one nemesis is in another person. But let me give you the floor.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully you at home have also identified that one person that you could actually use a break from all this conflict with. Okay. And it may feel like I don't try to do drama. This just kind of happens. This person kind of pulls me in. Well, that's because there's a formula and there is something in there that actually lures you in. But first, let's be honest and ask yourself, where is your starting gate? Because while we do switch roles in the drama triangle, we tend to enter into the drama triangle from a role. Some people enter from like the poor me, please rescue me position. Some people enter from that critical, judgmental, like, what is going on here, right? And some people enter in from like, how can I save you? Now, the part that I'm going to just be honest from my part, the smart starting gate for me is the rescuer, right? You can imagine like this coaching role. Now, what happens for the rescuer is that they tend to be so involved and overextending themselves to help other people that they are neglecting their own things. So I have to be very careful about that. And the thing about the rescuer position situation for those of you who are like super helpful and you're always there for other people is that it feels very like almost superhumanly stoic. So it's not an activating kind of experience like the victim or the villain would feel like, oh my gosh, something's wrong, right? So it kind of is harder to identify. So know that where your starting gate is, first of all. Once you've identified that, identify the other person's starting gate as well, okay? Now, know that in these psychological games, there's something called strokes. These are units of recognition, attention, or responsiveness that you're trying to get from the other person. Human beings, we want strokes. Even if they're negative, it could be positive or negative, we want those strokes from other people. And so this is what we're trying to get in these psychological games. Now, there are different ways that people get their needs met, but the most important one is the psychological games that involve other people. Because you could go pocket away, process it on your own. But we are social creatures, and so the psychological games are the main thing. And what we'll do in these games is that we'll run something called rackets, okay? So rackets are patterns of behavior that people use to manipulate other people. Now, this is happening unconsciously. So if you ask a lot of people like, hey, are you manipulating? They're going to be like, no, I'm not manipulating, because they don't even know sometimes themselves. This is also underneath a way to avoid intimacy with other people and actually to maintain a sense of superiority. Okay, but when it comes to the psychological game, there are 6 components. So I want you to write this formula down. The con plus the gimmick equals the response, which leads to the switch, which leads to the cross-up, and finally the payoff. Now, what does all of that mean? Well, the con is the bait, okay? You can imagine this as the lure. Actually imagine a fishing pole. At the end of it is a lure. The bait is sort of the manipulative statement that someone might use to pull you in. So if you're a rescuer like me, right, somebody in your life is probably prone to being a victim, and they might come and say like, oh my gosh, you're never going to believe what happened to me. Now, their end game is that they need me to rescue them, right? And because I have a belief system in the background that might be like, oh, if I can help somebody, I should definitely help them. I'm now baited in. Now, so the con, right, plus the gimmick. The gimmick is my vulnerability. The gimmick is the vulnerability that you have to actually latching onto that bait. So if I have a belief system, if I can help somebody, I should help somebody. That's my gimmick, and it makes me vulnerable to somebody dangling bait of like, please help me. Okay. Now, once you have those two things coming together, that equals the response. Now, the response is exactly as it sounds. This is how we actually respond or actually show up to the fact that like, okay,
how can I help?
How can I help?
Yeah.
And this is what Eric Berne actually calls a complementary transaction, meaning like if I'm always the parent and someone else is always the child, that may start to feel like, you know, now when we do a little bit of a cross up, what we call cross-transactional is if somebody's expecting me to be their rescuer or somebody's expecting me to be the parent, and I switch roles to the adult. Like, oh, okay, well, what are you going to do about that? I can't actually be available that day, but like, right? So then that causes some confusion. So game, we have the con, the gimmick, the response, which leads to the switch. Remember, this is a defining element of the psychological game, the switch. You're not staying in your one position. The switch looks like 1 minute I'm the hero, the next minute I'm like, gosh, you always call on me, like what? And I'm now the victim, and then the other person switches. Okay, so what happens as a result of the switch is that is the cross-up. The cross-up is that resulting feeling of confusion or disorientation, okay? So if you had to imagine, the switch is actually a way of gaining control in the game. 1 minute I'm this, and then switch to the other thing. And the other person is like, well, wait a second. And in order to stay complementary, they shift roles as well. So if I'm pointing the finger, they become the victim, maybe, right? Or if I become the victim, they become the rescuer, right? So we're switching roles over and over again. We're getting disoriented, and the person who's switching actually is grabbing control of the game. Then we go to the payoff. Now, the payoff sounds good, but it's actually the negative emotions that both people feel that actually underscore and solidify your life script, which you already believe. So if you believe all people are idiots, all men are the same, life is, hard, then what you feel as a result of that game is that is the payoff. Like, see, it's all men. See? Once again, it's so hard to be, like that sort of thing. So knowing what all these elements are for you helps you to actually step out of that victim consciousness and into a more responsible role so that you can go, you know what? I'm actually not going to play in these games anymore. I'm going to go directly to get my needs and desires met.
This is good stuff.
Yeah.
Man, it's deep but good.
It's deep.
All right. Well, thank you. Good
You're welcome.
topic.
Thank you.
All right. We'll take a break. Don't forget, next week, another topic. Don't go away. We'll be back right around the corner.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.